right here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come down and visit with you, meet some of you. I understand that some of you are running your first marathon, some are probably running your 40th or 50th marathon, whatever it is. Some of the important things about running a marathon are that if you've been training, it's just a matter of going through it and running what you're capable of running, not trying to do something special. If you want to do something special, do it in the last 4 or 5 miles. I've always said that when you run any race of any distance, run with your head for at least 2/3 or 3/4 of that race, and run with your heart the last 1/3 or 1/4. But don't get carried away early. It's the middle part of the race that you pass people. In fact, if you want to have a goal, some of you want to have a goal to shoot for in the marathon, start out easy and count how many people you pass. Give a little prize to who passes the most. Will it be 1,500 or 1,000 or whatever it is? I do that with my cross-country team all the time. Tell me, go out easy. Here's the problem with shorter races, is that the best runner goes out too fast and dies, but still wins because everybody went with him. You know, the ones who aren't that good went out even too much faster. So the guy who went out too fast and still wins thinks that's the way to run the race. But the time that the number 5 guy goes out slower, he'll probably beat that number 1 guy. You've got to pace it. You've got to focus on what you're doing. I was just talking to a really good runner the last week or so.
Check the plug, Jack. It's on. The lights are on. There you go.
Nothing? Well, there. I'll try to not do that. And this was a girl runner, and she said it's really interesting. When she's in a race and starts feeling bad, she thinks about some part of her body that isn't feeling bad. Really, and that makes a lot of sense. You know, if you're hurting breathing, quit worrying about breathing and start thinking about your legs. Because maybe your legs aren't feeling so bad. Or if you're feeling real dead in the legs, think about your face. I often tell my runners, start with your face, and your eyes are relaxed, and your jaw is relaxed, and your neck is relaxed, and your shoulders are relaxed, and your arms are relaxed, and your stomach, and your thighs, and your knees, and your feet. It takes you about a minute to go through your whole body from top to bottom. By the time you finish that, you're not even working hard anymore. There are a lot of little things you can think about. In marathon, you got plenty of time to do that. Plenty of time. And there's lots of ways to benefit and still be different. You know, I don't know, any of you remember Ken Martin? Kenny Martin. I used to coach Kenny and his wife Lisa. Lisa ran 2:24 and got a silver medal in one Olympics. And Kenny moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and didn't like doing long runs there. So he did all his long runs on his treadmill. He did a weekly 2-hour, 20-mile run on his treadmill for 12 weeks in a row. And he came to New York City and ran 2:09 and got 2nd overall. One Kenyan beat him. His PR was 2:12 at the time, and he did 20-milers on his treadmill. I'll tell you what, that's all up here. If you can go 20 miles on your treadmill every week, a 2-hour, 9-minute marathon is going to go by about that fast. No, I'm just saying that if some of you have an opportunity in miserable weather, maybe to run a little on a treadmill or something, it's not bad. In fact, we had in the year 2000, we only had one girl qualify for the Olympics in the marathon. And she lived in Alaska and did almost all her running on the treadmill. I just bring it up because there's lots of different ways to train. The most important single word about training for any event is consistency. You've got to do it regularly. Anybody can go out and do one great workout, and then that's it. Or they can have one good meal and figure I'm getting all the nutrition I need. You got to do it consistently, and that will work very, very well. That applies to eating and sleeping and training. You know, I knew a guy whose wife gave birth to their first baby at 5 one morning. He did not sleep that night, and that next afternoon broke a world record in a running event. You know, if you're getting regular sleep, one bad night won't hurt at all. I always tell my runners, I don't care if you sleep the night before a race or not. Then they all sleep well. but if I tell them, make sure you get 8 or 9 hours of sleep, they lie there and the paramedic worrying about it. So quit worrying about it. Focus on the task at hand. And if that means focus on what your legs are doing, what your turnover rate is, what your breathing rhythm is. You should never have to breathe harder than a 2-2 rhythm. You know, 2 steps breathing in, 2 steps breathing out. Most of you can probably even do 3-3. If you can't do 2-2, you're running too fast. I'll guarantee it. You better be able to breathe 2-2 the whole way. I'll tell you a great story about focusing on the task at hand. I used to coach down in Peru, in Lima, Peru, in South America, and I had a young 19-year-old who lived up by Lake Titicaca, which is about 12,500 feet of altitude. He was down in Lima running the national championships in the 5K. He was only a 19-year-old. With 5 laps left in the race, he was in 5th place, and he was about 60 meters behind the first 4 guys who were running as a pack in front of him. There in the middle of the turn, he was finishing the straightaway. And when he came by me, I'd only been there about 4 weeks and I didn't know much Spanish. And he said something in Spanish to me and I didn't know what it was. And I asked the guy next to me, I said, what did he say? He said he asked if he could drop out of the race. And I just kind of jokingly said to this guy, when he comes by the next time, you tell him, it's fine with me if he drops out, if he first catches the leaders. And he took me at my word. And he went after him. And it took him 4 laps to catch him. By the time he caught him, there was only a half a lap left in the race. And he thought, I might as well win this thing, and he did. He won the race. Because he had something to focus on besides hurting. When he came by me asking about dropping out, he was probably thinking, oh, I'm in 5th place. I got 5 more laps to go. I'm hurt and I don't want to do this. And all I said was, go catch them, you can quit. And he thought, boy, that's good, I'll do that. You know, I've done that. I did that with one of my other runners one race. And he said, it was nice weather. He said, I'd like to run a 2-mile, see if I can run a PR. And I said, okay, just run 1 lap at a time. When the first lap's over, run the second lap. It's not an 8-lap race, it's a 1-lap race. That doesn't mean to run as fast as you can for that 1 lap. That means running smart for that lap. And this really applies to a marathon. You better not be thinking, oh, I've only got 22 more miles to go. You better be thinking, I'm just going to go to that tree up there, or that building, or that turn. And when I get there, I'll go someplace else. You can't be thinking about how far it is to the end. You got to think about what you're doing. And this guy was perfect at it. And then he ran this 2-mile. I said, you run 1 lap. When the first lap's over, run the second lap. He finished that race. He ran a 20-second PR in the 2-mile. And I said, did you run 1 lap at a time? He said, no, I ran 1 step at a time. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. You got to really focus on what you're doing. Not worry about, did I do this right? Did I prepare? Did I eat the right meal? You know, your body, when you train, particularly high mileage, you burn a lot of stored glycogen that's in your muscles, and you need to replace that. You have enough glycogen stored in your muscles to run about 17-20 miles on pure carbohydrate fuel without using any fat at all. But if you're running at marathon pace, which is a comfortable pace, you're probably burning only about 80 to 90% carbohydrates. So that store of glycogen will last you 26 miles. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't take any energy during the race, because I would suggest you do. But hopefully you've practiced doing that. You don't want to do something new. That's another thing that's very important. Don't try something new that you've never done in practice. Simple examples of that are, I knew people who bought a brand new pair of shoes the day before the marathon. They never ran in them before. You know, there's nothing wrong with running in new shoes, or that are relatively new, but you better have run in them some so you know how they feel on your feet. I had a friend one time who never had run marathons. He wasn't a very good runner. And he wanted to run this marathon. He showed up at the start of the race with a pair of spikes. And we told him, you can't run in spikes. He said, why not? Those are my favorite shoes. He said, well, it's on the street. He said, so what should I wear? We said, well, you ought to get some flat shoes of some kind. He went into a 10-cent store and bought a pair of canvas kids. It was a two half marathon runs. He came around the first time around and both shoes were pure red from blood. He said, give me my spikes. And he got his spikes and put them on and ran the second time around. You know, we always kid about it. There are three kinds of people, and you all can fit in whatever category you want. One kind is, you're dumber than you look. One is, you're not as dumb as you look. And the third is, you're exactly as dumb as you look. We do that all the time. You have to be one of those three, don't you? Unless you're some kind of an optimist and you'd rather say I'm smarter than I look, that means you're not as dumb as you look. It's all the same. Think of things, probably in a marathon is the one race where you can actually think of things other than the race. You know, you can concentrate maybe on what you're going to do after the race or something like that, and get away from just grinding it out. It's a very marathons are very interesting, and you'd be surprised. I've been the national coach advisor for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society for the last about 17 years, and they do an unbelievably great job of raising money for leukemia research. They're really something. It's up around 85 million a year right now. And one doctor up in Oregon invented Gleevec, which is a drug that works, and it changed survival rate from 15% survival to 85% survival. So they're getting it done. Two of my subjects, I just finished a research study, by the way. You'll probably maybe read about it sometime. For my dissertation in 1968, about 100 years ago, I tested 26 of the top distance runners in the United States. I had people like Bob Schul and Jim Ryan and Jerry Lindgren and George Young, and they were all subjects. And I tested them all, and in 1993, I got all 26 of them back and retested them again, 25 years later. And I just finished testing them this summer. 45 years later. They're now 69 years old. And that's going to be a very, very interesting research study. I can tell you one thing about it that maybe most of you can understand. I won't get into the VO2 and the economy and all that stuff, but heart rates. You know, you hear all these stories about heart rate. Subtract your age from 220 and that will tell you your maximum heart rate. This group, as 24-year-olds, their average maximum heart rate was 178. When they turned 40, the year they turned 50, their maximum heart rate was 177. And this summer, they're 69, and their max heart rate was 167. That might work for 1,000 people as an average, but everybody's got a different value of their own. And you can't just say, I had a 160 heart rate and you only had a 150, so I'm working harder. No, may not be at all. Maybe you're working closer to your maximum than the other person. You've got to get a feel for how you're running. Feel of how you're running is the most important thing. And if you're having a bad day and you're not feeling good, then back off a little bit. In fact, I would have to say there's nothing wrong with dropping out of a marathon. I argue with a lot of the leukemia coaches. And because they read someplace that to run a marathon you have to do some 20-mile runs. I don't believe that. I really don't believe it. Because what if you're a 6-hour marathoner? How long is a 20-mile run going to take you? About 4.5 hours? Now you ask Ryan Hall, does he want to do some 45-mile training runs? You say, no way. Well, that's how far he'd go in 4.5 hours. So why should a beginner, a raw beginner, spend more time running in a long run than the elite do? I like to limit those long runs to about 2.5 hours. I don't care how good or slow you are. If you can only make 15 miles in that long run, fair enough. You've run for 2.5 hours. I'll tell you what, I'm not a good runner. That's not my sport. That's why I took up coaching running, because I'm so terrible at it. I wanted to learn about it. One of my daughters ran a marathon a couple of years ago over in Dublin for leukemia. And she's not a runner either. And she alternately ran and walked. And I'm up in Flagstaff, Arizona at 7,000 feet. And I thought, if she can do this, I can do it. And I went out that day and did 26 miles. But the longest training run I had done in the previous 5 years was 3 miles. Wow. The most mileage I ran in 1 week in the previous 5 years was 8 miles. But I alternately ran and walked. You can do it. If you're having trouble in a marathon, walk a little bit, then run again. You'd be surprised how fast you can go. And you know, I'm not talking to the really good people when I say that, because the good people won't have to do that. But don't be afraid, if you're not feeling good, back off a little bit and see what you can manage. It's a very individual event. If you have a partner that you're going to run with, that's fine. You can encourage each other, but don't make somebody go faster than they feel like going. That's not good. You don't want to have somebody you're running with say, come on, let's get going. No, we don't need to do that. So try to figure out what pace is good for you, and the pace that's good for you is the pace you've been training at. Don't think that now it's a race so I can go faster. If you want to go faster in a marathon, wait till the last 4 or 5 miles to go faster. Don't do it in the first 20. It's a very, very interesting event. Oh, and by the way, I think I finally convinced the leukemia coaches they didn't need to do 20-mile training runs. Because one of them finally told me why it was so important to do some 20-mile training runs, because it has a 2 in it. The same as a marathon. So I finally figured out, well, you know what? 12 also has a 2 in it. Maybe that's enough. Are there any short questions I could try to answer for anybody here? In that one that I went, oh, brother. No, it was over 6 hours. But I counted every step. Every step I counted. I ran for 100 right footfalls and walked for 50. And I did that for the entire 6 hours. And felt fine in 2 days. And all I was thinking while I was doing it was, boy, am I going to feel miserable. Because I've run a few marathons and you feel, you can barely walk after them. And this one didn't bother me at all. First marathon I ever ran was at 7,000 feet of altitude in Alamosa, Colorado, 7,300 feet. And it was 85 degrees and no sun, or I mean no clouds. It was hot. And my longest run of my life at that time was 13 miles. And the longest run of that year was 6 miles. And I ran 2:30. And lost 8.5 pounds. I didn't drink. In those days you didn't drink. Nobody drank. You better drink. I did a major research study on fluid consumption and fluid loss down in Phoenix, Arizona a few years ago. And we had 32 runners who raced a 25K each of 3 consecutive Saturdays. And they were allowed to drink as much as they wanted. And we had 4 different groups of 8. One group had Gatorade, one group had XL1, which is a Norwegian sport drink, and one group had a fake XL1 that had no energy in it, but it was colored and looked like, and the fourth group had green colored water. And after each run, we'd ask them, because we did it 3 weeks in a row, and group 1 moved to group 2's drink, and group 2 moved to 3, and 3 moved to 1, and group 4 stayed plain water. They didn't know that. They thought they were rotating too. And we measured everybody's nude weight pre and post, and we measured how much they drank to the milliliter. And I had 2 guys who ran within 1 minute of the same time, and weighed within 1 pound of the same weight, so they were pretty equal. One of them, and they both drank exactly 1 liter, and one of them lost 8.8 pounds, and one of them lost 3.5. People are not the same. You need to practice drinking. And when you go out, if you haven't done it already, next time you ought to go out on some runs, even just an hour, and weigh yourself before and after, and don't drink, and see how much, and then write down how much you lost, and what the temperature was, and what the humidity was, and make a table of that. After you do that a while, you could go to your table and say, oh, it's going to be 52 degrees, here's what I'm going to lose. You know ahead of time, then you know how much you have to take in. What you want to do is avoid losing more than about 3% of your body weight. And you don't want to overdrink during the marathon. We've had cases of people, because they've been told they have to drink so much, there have been people who've weighed more than 2 pounds more at the end of the race than when they started. That's absolutely true. You don't want to overdrink, you want to drink as much as you need to drink. And you better have some electrolytes in it, not just plain water, so you can avoid the hyponatremia problem. So there's all kinds of little things. Hopefully you've been kind of talked to about some of these things. You have a question?
Yeah, just actually 2. Number 1, very briefly, where did you grow up? And secondly, women will never catch men in the marathon times, will they?
Okay. I'm now going to tell them a story about carrying the pack. Here's where women might beat men. I give this question to my grad class that I teach. I teach graduate physiology classes. And here's one of their take-home final exams. You're starting in Phoenix, and you're walking to Malibu, California, 407 miles away. The daytime high is going to be 85 degrees, and the nighttime low is going to be 45 degrees, and there's not going to be any cloud cover. And everything that you drink or eat or wear on that trip, you must carry on your back from the start. You cannot take in any supplies along. You can't eat grass or drink water from a stream. So the questions you have to answer are, what would you carry and how far would you get before you ran out? And would a woman or a man win that?
Woman. Of course.
We'll see. You know, if the woman's smaller, she probably carries less weight, but she probably sweats less.
Yep.
So who's going to win it? Somebody who doesn't carry as much and doesn't sweat as much, or somebody who can carry more but sweats more?
Right.
Is there another question? Yeah.
For novices, do you think there's any, irrespective of the physiological arguments, do you think there's any psychological advantage for novices getting accustomed to running 20 miles, give or take a couple miles, in advance of training for a marathon, as opposed to running 12 miles? You leave the 2 up front.
No, that's what everybody always talks about, the psychological effect. And I'm saying that that's up to the coach to tell them it doesn't matter. If you've been told that you don't have to do 20 miles, if you've been told that over and over again, maybe you'll start to believe it. And there's nothing wrong with doing some 20-mile runs. What's wrong is if you do it without building up to it. You can't just do it from day one. You know, you've never run at all, and 3 weeks from now we're going to do some 20-mile runs.
What about the mental training for getting that distance?
So who's telling them that it's a mental problem? No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, why would it be a mental problem if somebody didn't mention it to you? You've got to do some 20-mile runs. If somebody says that, then you have it in your mind that you got to do some 20-mile. But if nobody's ever said that to you, why would it even be an issue? That's the way I look at it, you know, because I'd rather, if I'm coaching a bunch of people, I'd much rather they got hurt running the marathon than hurt training to run for the marathon. They don't even get to run it. And if a 20-mile run is going to hurt them because they didn't build up to it, sure, if you got 6 months or a year, you might be able to build up some 20. I'm not against that. What I would like to say is that your long run shouldn't be more than 25% of your total week. So if you're doing 80 miles a week, then 20 is good. But if you're doing 30 miles a week, 20 is not too good. But what you can do, realistically, to get more mileage in, is bunch some runs. Do a Saturday evening 10-miler and a Sunday morning 12-miler. There's 22 miles within about an 8 or 10 hour period. And that'll probably do the same thing to your body, plus getting you a little rest in between. So your body's used to doing it. There's nothing wrong with 20, but you can't rush into it. That's what I'm against, is saying, okay, we've only got, because the Leukemia Society has, for some reason, 17 weeks is the maximum they have. And to take somebody who's never run before and tell them they got to do some 20-mile runs within 17 weeks, that's asking a lot, I think. I think that's asking for trouble. I would rather tell them run a half marathon first and don't even try to do a marathon in 17 weeks. Yes?
The question about recovery. On how long a marathon runner should take time off before they start running again?
Again, it's a function of, you know, how much you're used to running. We got a guy here who runs one every week or something like that, and he didn't have a problem. So, but normally, I just have a rough little formula that it says you take one real easy day for every 3,000 meters of race distance. So from a 10K, that's 3 days. From a half marathon, that's 7 days. And from a marathon, that's 14 days. Take a day off easy for every 3,000 meters of the race distance. So if you ran a 15K, you got to take 5 weeks. I'm not saying you need to take that much, but it kind of makes it kind of conservative without overdoing it. Yeah.
They also run easy.
Either. You know, it depends on how stiff you are. You know, if you can run easy, then that's fine. Now, I should say...
10 days off work.
Right. Let me show you physiologically. If you run 10 minutes a day, it'll improve your fitness about this much. If you run 30 minutes a day, it'll improve your fitness about this much. If you run 60 minutes a day, it'll improve your fitness about this much. 30 minutes is big time, and they've done a lot of research on that. Your body function improves tremendously with 30 minutes of exercise. 60 minutes is more, but it's a very little bit more. So then now it just becomes a matter of mental, partly, you know, a little more distance, or how much time you got. You know, I mean, sure, I'm not saying that 60 isn't better, but is it better for what you're putting into it? You know, how much time have you got to do these things? And obviously, some people don't have as much time as others. One thing you really ought to try, if you haven't ever tried it, is bunching those weekend runs. In fact, you could even do a Saturday morning, Saturday evening, and Sunday morning. You get 3 runs, you get about 30 miles in about a 24-hour period. And that's not a bad way of looking at high mileage runs. Because it's different days, but the body hasn't recovered from the first one when you're doing the second one. And so it has to learn to metabolize fat for fuel better. Yes?